What's up guys, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I am actively building a high performance team in terms of building, leading and winning, how we're actively implementing different strategies and mental models, and how I'm actively thinking about building the best high performance team, with the mission of these videos to show our builds raw and real, to show you the good, the bad, the ugly, and also just to show you the mental models and frameworks that we're actively implementing so that into the future we can build better and scale better, and to solve problems within businesses and organizations, basically to come in and build infrastructure and solve their chaos, to be the chief problem solvers, and also just to call in visionaries, basically people that understand what it is that we're actively building and just aren't aligned on that mission, and also just to network with cool people doing cool things at the same time. So with these videos broken down into 5 simple steps, as always, how I am running my team to win in 5 simple steps, with number 1 being set a clear North Star, align with the mission. This is pretty self-explanatory, making sure that every single person within the team is aligned to what it is that we have as a goal, to say, hey, I have this vision and I'm making sure that everyone in the team is aligned with this vision by saying, hey, a team without a shared goal is chaos, basically building chaos, because no one is aligned with what it is that we're actively building towards, and it's shared amongst us. If one person has a vision and other people aren't aligned with that vision, it's going to cause friction, and ultimately that friction is ultimately just going to delay or slow things down for us and what it is that we're actively building in terms of systems and backend infrastructure, and saying, hey, my $100 million vision keeps us locked in to say, hey, we want to inspire millions of people, we want to make impact, we want to create impact, and we ultimately just want to solve problems and create value, to say, hey, what it is that we're building, we're ultimately building to solve chaos and ultimately just to inspire millions. And ultimately with that vision, I know my team is ultimately aligned with that, to say, hey, we're ultimately aligned and we share this vision of impacting millions of people, and what is the motor or what is the vehicle that we're going to be doing this in, and it's ultimately just going to be building back-end infrastructure and then ultimately just scaling up from there. But ultimately the main vision and the main goal, which is to basically create $100 million worth of impact, and then also just inspire millions of people to also do the same and build the next generation by reshaping the industry, and saying, hey, what I'm actively doing is weekly huddles on repeat. So making sure that the team each and every single week we're actively implementing a huddle, saying, hey, we're having a massive huddle each Monday to say, hey, these are the goals that we need to set for this week, this is what we did last week, and ultimately just having touch points and saying, hey, each and every single day we're going to have a 15-minute call just to touch base, to say, hey, are we aligned with the vision and the mission that we're all striving to, and ultimately just to check KPIs to say, hey, are we hitting KPIs, are we below KPIs, and how is everything going, just to make sure that everyone is just aligned. Because if you don't have that constant checkup or that feedback from everyone within the team, you're ultimately just gonna get to a point where everyone is not being as productive as they possibly can, and you ultimately just don't want that. And saying, hey, we're killing chaos for planners, every line of code, every design, every DM counts, making sure that everyone understands their roles and responsibility, and also assigning ownership to that, to say, hey, this is your responsibility. And when you assign ownership, a lot of people now start taking the initiative to say, hey, like, this actually matters and I need to do something about it, where it's not a thing of saying, hey, the ownership is not assigned to you. So ultimately, if the ownership is not assigned to you, you're not going to take that responsibility to say, hey, it's all me, it's all my fault if things go bad. And ultimately that's not something that you want to have. And I ultimately always just make sure to strive that every single person in the team understands that they have a shared responsibility and they need to take ownership in what it is that we're building, and making sure that what it is that we're building, we're making sure that all the failures and all the mistakes that happen, we're ultimately building so that we can learn and also just iterate better and build better products. And saying, hey, how I'm improving is, I used to assume alignment to say, hey, every single person is aligned, they just automatically aligned within the team, but that's not the case. I found that not to be the case. While this was true to saying, hey, if I just leave people to do their own thing each and every single day and not speak about alignment and talk about what the vision and the mission is, people get lost and they don't know what is going on, and ultimately you don't want that. You don't want to be in a state where people don't understand what the vision is, or they lose track and sight of that, to say, hey, we don't understand what the vision is, or we've lost the vision because so many things have gone astray, and ultimately you don't want to do that. And that is the lesson that I had to learn for myself, which was not a best lesson to learn, but ultimately it's just one of those lessons that you have to learn to ultimately just build better and iterate much better, because I like to say iteration is the key to innovation. So yeah, so ultimately just building for that and saying now I over communicate the why, making sure that every single person understands what the why is, and making sure that on my side I over communicate because I don't want to under communicate, because under communicating has never led to good things happening in the past for me, especially in what it is that I have learned. So ultimately just saying, hey, I would rather over communicate and make sure that everyone understands every tiny bit of detail and is aligned to the mission, and ultimately just is building towards that and saying, hey, this automation saves planners 20 hours, ultimately just bringing that alignment back to say, hey, this is the overall mission that we're striving for, and we need to make sure that what it is that we're building is ultimately building for this main overarching goal. And saying, hey, asking the first principles question of saying, what's the core goal that unites your team on its daily grind, to say, hey, what if you could pick 1 to 3 things, what is the number one thing that unites the team in order to get to that goal that we're ultimately striving for? For us, it's just creating impact and solving problems, and just ultimately saying, hey, we want to create impact and we want to solve problems, and then every single thing just falls into that category. And saying, hey, the 2 3 main other things that aren't as highly ranked as the first one ultimately just feed into that or support it, and ultimately just building for that. And then saying, hey, number two, which is empower with tools and ownership, like I mentioned in the first part. And why this is key is great teams need great tools and freedom to own their work. So making sure that every single person understand that their work, they own it, and that they need to have ownership in what it is that we're actively doing or what their role entails. And saying, hey, how I'm doing it is development lovable for rapid prototyping, depends what we're using the prototyping for. GitHub for clean code, making sure that what it is that we're doing, we're just storing it on GitHub, and that everyone has access to that, and we're just making sure that each and every moving part of the development side is built with ownership, and making sure that every single person within the team is owning their role in terms of development and design as well. Saying, hey, Figma for client facing dashboards, and then outreach, Lemless, 50 emails a day, making sure that the SDR team or the selling team or the sales team is ultimately just running that, and uses Airtable for lead scoring, just making sure that they're taking ownership to say, hey, for me, every single day, my responsibility is to make sure that we're pumping out emails, we're pumping out lead scoring, and making sure that the leads are scored and are tied to what it is that we're actively building, and hitting KPIs as well. And saying, hey, how I'm improving personally was too hands-on. I was way too hands-on, not even micro managing, nano managing. Now I just let devs do their own sprints. I let the designers lead their own visuals, outreach, picks targets, and then I ultimately just come in and just make sure things are refined, and ultimately just be that supporting aid to make sure everything is up to standard. And then saying, hey, what is the first principles question that we can ask from this is, what's the simplest tool or freedom that could 10x your team's output by giving them tools and freedom? Because ultimately giving them the best tool, they are already best, assuming that they're coming into your team. You verified and checked that, hey, this is the best possible person that can help us in our mission. And if they come into your team and into your ecosystem, you ultimately need to make sure that you're giving the best possible platform in order for them to achieve success, not only for them, but not only for you, but also for them, to say, hey, you need to make sure that you're giving them the best tools at their disposal so they can create the best possible result for the business as well, and also for themselves, so that they always constantly learning, innovating, and iterating on what it is that they're actively doing in their roles, and that they're assigning ownership to that. And then saying, hey, the third point, which is super important for me, making sure that I take care of my team, making sure that I always treat my team fairly and always make sure that they're taken care of. And saying, hey, a team that feels valued goes harder than anyone else. And I think this is just straight up facts, to say everyone that feels valued and wanted within the team ultimately just strives to do a lot more, pushes the boundaries, and ultimately takes ownership to say, hey, we messed up, but ultimately I know that I am valued, and I'm going to be doing the best possible work that I can be doing, and that is unmatched if everyone's just aligned on what it is that we're actively doing. So this is why I actively implement weekly one-on-ones to hear their pain points, to say, hey, I actually care about what is going on in your life. How is the family? How is everything going on? Because ultimately that also affects how they perform within the team, to make sure that, hey, you're not just doing work and then you going off, but I actually have a connection with the team members, and making sure that, hey, I'm also here to solve your problems, and I'm also here for you, and saying, hey, fix the dev's slow laptop issues last week, to say, hey, last time we had a situation where one of my developers was having an issue in terms of connectivity and stuff like that, and I said, hey, let's just sort that out for you, and then ultimately just solving problems for them, because ultimately they are helping the business, and I need to also just be there to give them a handing help, or a hand to help, or lending a help to hand. I'm not really too sure what it is, but yeah, essentially. And then saying, hey, shout outs and videos, my outreach squad hit 6%, lemurous require beast, like a bunch of beasts, man. Like, always just making sure that praises within the team are given, to say, hey, my team is crushing it, and I'm gonna make sure that they're seen and heard, and that they know that they're crushing it, and I'm not just saying, hey, you're crushing it, but I'm not gonna give you the props. And ultimately saying, hey, or how I'm actively improving is, before I skipped one-on-ones when I was busy. Now they're non-negotiable. I have to make sure that 15 minutes I set time to speak to my team one-on-one, because sometimes some people react better in a group set, in a one-on-one setting versus a group setting, to say, hey, like, if you're part of the team, when we have our weekly meetings with every single person, how would that react? How do they react when it's one-on-one? Are they more personal? Because you get that time to really understand who a person is, and ultimately just allows them to be themselves, and then you can help and guide better, and understand how they need to be, uh, and how they need to be guided and also helped to bring out the best in them. And saying, hey, what's the first principles question that we can ask from this is, what's the core thing your team needs to feel unstoppable, to make sure that you give them the platform to ultimately give them the best possible chance of success, and ultimately just leading them to be the best possible version that they can possibly be. Ultimately just brings out the best, and just makes them want to go even harder. And this is so unmatched, especially when you're building your team. I found, in just finding the right people, ultimately need to be aligned, and you just need to enjoy working with them, and it needs to feel like fun. And then saying, hey, the fourth point, which is super important as well, is data is your team's GPS, making sure that within the team you're always tracking metrics, you're always understanding, hey, this person's performing at this rate, this person's doing this and that. Everyone's just staying on top of KPIs. And why this is key is because without data, there's no progress. Track what moves the needle, making sure that every single person within the team understands their KPIs, and that they're also producing KPIs themselves, making sure that, hey, we need to make sure that everyone's hitting the targets, and if they're not hitting the targets, then you ultimately not moving the needle, and that's when you need to make decisions on how to best help and also guide them as well. And saying, hey, how I'm actively doing this is, devs sprint velocities up to 20%, so hey, they're just building things faster, and saying, hey, within a month, can you get this done? Can we get this done within 4 weeks instead of 6 weeks? And ultimately just upping up the pace that they get it done, but also doing it right at the same time, is super crucial. And then saying, hey, design client feedback on Figma mockups, 80% approval, making sure that our clients are super happy with the Figma designs, and making sure that, hey, if they have problems, that we're actively solving for them, and saying, hey, we have an 80% approvals response rate, to say, hey, we're actively doing good, so 80% is good for us, but we can always do better. But I think 80% being conservative is actually really good for us, and just keeping up the work in terms of just sticking to the details, and ultimately just building around that. And saying, hey, outreach, Airtable DMs 20 per day. I make sure to, oh, sorry, no, my bad. Airtable tracks DMs, say, hey, 20 per day. 2 calls, 5 per week, 10 is the goal. Ultimately just setting those KPIs that we need to hit, and making sure that we're actively building towards that, and we understand where the bottlenecks are. And how I'm actively improving on this is, I was soft on metrics. Like before, I never used to make sure that I am super dialed in on metrics. I'm staring on metrics every single day, but now I review weekly tweak spots weekly, sometimes even daily, making sure that I'm tweaking spots. I'm making sure that I understand what the metrics are on a day-to-day basis so that we can ultimately improve and also just build better and scale better as well. Because if you don't understand your metrics, you're ultimately screwed. You don't know what is going on within the business, and you don't know what it is that you need to refine. And ultimately saying, hey, first principles question, what is the one number that shows your team's winning? So what is the one KPI that ties down to your team's success? And ultimately just understanding that, hey, this one KPI, is it delivery, is it service delivery, is it fulfillment, is it the number of leads coming in? And ultimately just understanding that, because different models have different KPIs that they might want to use. So for example, if you're doing lead gen, it might be how many sales you're generating your clients, and ultimately asking those different questions to say, hey, what's the one number that shows your team is winning? So are you generating more cash flow? Are you pumping out results much quicker within a specific time frame? Are we getting designs approved? And just ultimately just asking those questions leads to a level of awareness and understanding that ultimately allows us to build better and scale better into the future. And saying, hey, daily grid sets the tone. So ultimately saying my team mirrors my energy. If my energy is low, ultimately the team's energy is also going to be low. But if I slack, they slack too, because they look at me as top level management or leadership, and they need to see inspiration from me. So ultimately saying, hey, if I slack, I know that feeds down into the team as well, to say, hey, if they see me slacking, why would they have the motivation to not slack? So ultimately just having that mindset of saying, hey, if I'm slacking, I need to make sure that I need to pick it up as soon as possible and not make it a common thing. Because if I start slacking, the team starts slacking. But if I'm energetic and I'm the most energetic person within the team, ultimately that is ultimately going to inspire every single person to be as energetic and as enthusiastic, and also want to build and solve problems at the highest level. And with my energy, that sets the tone. Like with me, it sets the tone for so many things. And if I'm not at the standard that I need to be, that ultimately is gonna trickle down into the team, and ultimately you do not want that. You want positive energy feedback that ultimately guides the team to build better and scale better into the future. But ultimately just building cool things requires you at the top to be most energetic, always there to just pump out results, and having that mindset of saying, hey, we need to win. Because if you have that mindset at the top level management or the top guy within the business, and everyone else looks to you, they're also going to feel inspired that, hey, there's nothing we cannot beat. And saying, hey, how I'm actively doing this is 33 days of daily content. With flu shows my squad, I am all in, making sure that, hey, I have the sense of urgency to be all in what it is that we're actively doing. Even just recording these videos, 33 days is not an easy thing to do. I mean, we've been pumping out videos, for 33 days straight. This is day 33. And ultimately saying, hey, even if I'm sick, if whatever the case may be, I'm gonna make sure that I'm showing up each and every single day for me, and also for my team as well. That's super important, because if I can't show up for my team, who's gonna be there to guide them as well? And if there's no guidance for them, they're not gonna do anything, which ultimately does not move the needle. And saying, hey, how I'm improving, I used to delegate and then dip. So hey, do XYZ and then leave. But now I'm in Slack daily, hyping wins, solving blockers, making sure that I'm active in the team, making sure, hey, if someone texts me 3 seconds or 5 or 10 seconds later, I'm responding or I'm typing back, and I'm making sure that, hey, I'm actively proactively solving their problems and ultimately guiding them if they're having challenges, and ultimately just saying, hey, we need to solve XYZ now, and we ultimately just need to have these down to the wire. And then saying, hey, the first principles question is, what's the core way you can show up for your team if when you're all in? Basically saying, hey, I'm all in and I know that we're gonna solve things, but I need to be all in. Everyone needs to be all in, but in order for everyone else to be all in, I need to be all in first. And ultimately just having that approach, I think, ultimately builds and sets the tone to say, hey, daily grid from my side, it's not only me, it's the team as well. But ultimately saying, hey, the buck stops with me, and ultimately I need to be the one that's most enthusiastic, learning the most, ultimately, so that I can guide the most, and ultimately that trickles down into the team. Because for me, I need to be the one that's the most knowledgeable in most areas, but to the point that they also tell me what to do. So it's not just me guiding each and every single time, like, hey, do XYZ. I just want to give them the playing field with the tools that they need, and then they just tell me what to do. They say, hey, we need to get XYZ done. Instead of giving me 10 problems, they give me 3 problems and they give me one solution. I think this comes from Software as a Service by Dan Mortal, where it says, hey, oh no, not buy back your time, my bad. And then saying, hey, bring me 3 problems and give me one solution that you think is best, and then ultimately we're gonna run with that. And ultimately that's also a way that I'm thinking about solving problems within the team, to say, hey, if you're gonna come to me, please come to me with three problems, and then give me one solution that you think would work, and then ultimately we're gonna run with that. And saying, hey, ultimately we're just going to build better, scale better into the future, and this is what we're using. I know we're deep in the trenches, we're still learning, we're still improving, we're still diving deep and fully understanding all of these things, but I know, like, right now what it is that we have is ultimately working, and when it does not work, then ultimately we will refine it, and I'll also share it with you guys. So yeah, if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and make sure to subscribe on YouTube, and I will see you guys in the next video.